Few things are for sure in this life, but this is. If we live for any substantial amount of time, we will encounter grief due to the loss of a loved one. Not something any of us ever want, and we all handle it differently. This podcast is to feature those who have done purposeful and meaningful things through their grief. These people featured on here are normal folks, just like you and me, who were thrust into a place they never wanted to be in their lives. A painful place. As they move through their pain, they realize that something worthwhile, something for the greater good could come out of the unthinkable. I'm sure that none of them would ever consider themselves to be a hero, but when I searched the definition of the word hero, I found this: a person who is admired or idolized for courage, outstanding achievements, or noble qualities. And that fit. And so it's my privilege to bring you the remarkable stories of these heroes in grief. Hi, everyone. This is Tom, your host for the Heroes in Grief podcast, and the response has been incredible so far, and I want to thank you for that. It's getting out to people, and they're letting us know that it's helping them, and that is what it's all about. I want to make you aware of a way that you can support this podcast without having to spend 1 cent, and that is through affiliate marketing. I've set up affiliate marketing for online shopping. If you do online shopping, then I have links to all the major retailers, most of them anyways, and I can provide them for you so that when you buy online through those links, you'll help support the podcast through the percentages that we get. It doesn't cost you anything more. You just shop like you regularly would on the sites that you love. It's very easy. All you have to do is shop. And that's it. Just let me know the links to the places that you want to shop at, and I will provide the affiliate links so that you can do it. If you want more information on this, you can go to heroesingrief.com. It takes you to the Linktree page where a video explains it in a little more detail. But you can always email me at tom@heroesingrief.com, and I can answer questions for you. But you can support the podcast that way, and it's very easy, very simple, and it doesn't cost you a cent. Isn't that great? Thank you. Now here's today's episode. Everybody, welcome to the Heroes in Grief podcast. Good to have you with us today, and I'm very excited today because I have Sara Rian with me, and most of you in grief circles would have seen Sara's poems come by or something on social media, probably because I was not even aware of her, and I had a friend send me something that was from her, and then a little more down the line, all of a sudden I got something else, and I see this name Sara Rian on there. And so I looked on Instagram and I looked you up, and we were already followers on there. So it was incredible. It cracked me up. Hi, Sara. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
I'm very excited to have you because I think you got a great following, of course, out there. You know that. And I think that your things just resonate with people so much, and it's very special to have you on. So I appreciate it. Thank you. And too bad about those Tigers. You know, I'm a Detroit Tigers fan, believe it or not. When I was 7 years old, I was on the Tigers.
Yeah.
So.
Hey, that's great. That's great. They're a great team. They're a great team to love.
It was
and follow.
fun. Yeah, it was fun. I didn't even know they were in the playoffs this year, but there they were, and they. Yeah.
It was shocking as far as we made it. So yeah, Detroit is very proud and we're still very happy, even though we didn't make it all the way.
Yeah, well, you got the Lions going now too. That looks good. A lot of fun.
Yes,
a lot of fun. Excellent. So Sara, again, thank you so much for coming on. And you know, I like to have people share their grief story or what got them into doing what they're doing. And I did read your bio and things, so I know that a lot of this got started from 2018, actually, when your mom passed away, correct? And as much as you want to share about that story, why don't you just let us know what kind of got you into this and some of the background to that?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, in 2018, my mother passed away by suicide, July 15th of 2018. She had a very long history of depression and struggled with alcohol, and all of it was stemming from so much trauma. So we understood that very young, that my mother was living with PTSD, but no matter, it never defined her. She was just the best mom. She was present, loving. No one really knew, like, that, maybe when we talked about it, we were going through something, but people were usually shocked to find out that she really was struggling so much for so many years, long before me and my siblings were even born. So even though she had lived with depression and mental illness, we just never thought we were going to lose her to suicide. She had had attempts. She had struggled and with suicidality and suicidal thoughts her entire life. And it almost made us think she was just unbeatable, just immortal. And so, some people would ask us, did you see it coming? Did you prepare? Did you kind of know this was going to happen? And it was actually quite the opposite, because we became kind of desensitized to it. Suicidality was something I eventually worked with. I'm a therapist, so I eventually started working in youth suicide prevention. I worked on crisis lines. It almost just became like a part of life, working to prevent suicide, working against suicidal thoughts. So when, she lost the war against depression, we were almost more shocked, because we just really didn't think. We just thought we were gonna
Sure.
beat it, and she had been doing better, and we were just heartbroken and also completely traumatized and shocked. And that's what started all the writing around grief. That was the only way I really could organize my thoughts. And I was having, a major trauma response to everything on top of the grief. It was a very complicated grief. And obviously with suicide loss, it's a disenfranchised kind of grief, and there's a lot of stigma around it. So poetry is what I turned to. And so that began, the grief poetry began in 2018, and obviously still going. I still keep finding things to write about every time. I think I'm like, all right, there's probably nothing else that'll come to mind. I just keep writing. So that's, she started it. She started it all.
A couple of things before you go too far. What was your mom's name? Susan. I should say, is your mom's name.
Yeah.
I still find myself falling into
Susan,
that.
Mom, but
So I can identify with a lot of your story, part of your story anyways, because I was the youngest of 7 kids, and my dad died when I was 10. And so there was a time where I ended up living just with my mom alone. She got remarried and these kind of things, but some of the things she went through, I can definitely identify with you on with that. And it's a real struggle as a child to sit there, and you grow up kind of quick in the midst of that kind of stuff. And but I could see how you could definitely like just put it aside and say, well, that's, those things happen, but it's just not going to happen ultimately, And then you talked about your writings. I was reading some of them, and the depth of them still is really amazing, because I wondered about that, because yes, like you said, 6 years down the line now, and they are still so deep and so poignant for people. And, so that just comes to you because of your abilities, I guess. Right. But it was interesting to hear you say that you wonder if it's kind of done or what's going on. But yeah, they're so good and so powerful. And so what goes on with that with you?
Well, thank you. I always laugh because, and I tell everyone this, like it doesn't feel like poetry. I know people, poetry and you're writing, and it feels more like these are like journal entries, like it's a diary, and it's just random. I'm not someone that can sit down and create. Like I can't say, now I'm going to go write. All it is like everything that someone's reading is just something that I thought of as I was washing a dish, or as I was in the grocery store, or before falling asleep. I jot it down in my notes app, and I don't really edit. I've definitely posted things with typos. It's like raw and yes, very unpolished, just thoughts, just things about grief, things I was feeling, sometimes it's directed towards like society and just about grief as a whole. Sometimes it's talking directly to my mom. Sometimes it's just about grief. And so when you see it, anything I post, I had just written it usually 5 minutes prior, and I type it all out and I just kind of post it immediately. So yeah, it's, I don't think people totally know, like I don't have anything prepped. I don't, um, have scheduled posts or anything like that. Everything is live time. I just wrote it and just decided to share it with
Yeah.
everybody. And it just, yeah, I always think that's it. Like there's nothing else I could feel. There's nothing else I could think about grief. There's no other way to conceptualize what this feels like. And then grief surprises you every time, and it just stays deep and it stays intense. And there's still so many questions. And it just, yeah, we're at 6 years, and yeah, I just keep thinking of things and feeling things and
Yeah.
and sharing
I think
them.
that's why it really resonates with people, because you're so real about it, as you said, and that's what people want. They're sick of all the platitudes, all the things that people put out there, and they want to connect. They want to know that you're feeling what they're feeling. And I think that really comes through in your stuff, and that's fantastic. So awesome. Great. So you have a website up with your books and things. What about the books? How are those developed, and what's the story behind those?
Yeah. So I actually had started writing before, just a little bit of poetry. I was starting to write. I, at the time, was a therapist for a sexual assault program on a college campus. I was, talking about trauma. I was talking about female empowerment. I'm a certified sex therapist, so I was also talking about sexual health with people. And I started writing as just a place to put all of that, just empowering words and things. When my mom passed away and it shifted into grief, it was pretty like rapid. I was just writing and writing and writing. So that's when I actually created my first book. I published it. It's no longer available, but that was my first book, was 2018. I unpublished just because my writing style is so different, and I almost just want to like keep that like sacred.
Yeah.
And so I removed that. I did the same thing in 2019 or 2018. I did another one in 2019. And I believe I actually did another two in 2019 total. So my first two were published, unpublished. And then my third is half about grief. That one's called When Bones Bloom. That's half about grief and then half about meeting my husband. We knew each other. We met and began dating, and it was about falling in love and partnering with this person while being a grieving person. Because, grievers, I mean, I don't want to use the term high maintenance, but I was kind of high maintenance. I was having nightmares. I was crying all the time. I was scared of people dying. I was blaming myself. So I was a very normal kind of high maintenance. I was grieving.
Thank you for
and
that
so
transparency. That's awesome.
Yeah. Oh, yes, absolutely. I like people to know, like, it is ugly. It is, especially in the early grief, it was so ugly. And, to write about someone still being worthy of love as a griever, especially in early grief, was so incredible. So I published, and every year I've published a new poetry book, and every year they become more general. So my last two books, Loving the Gone and Find Me There, they are completely completely grief focused and very general. So I'm finding a lot of folks connecting with those books because they are not specific to parent loss or suicide loss. And because they are 100% grief versus just half. So yeah, that's just kind of how they've developed. So I also have a children's book that I wrote right when I was pregnant with my first daughter, and that's just about staying connected to their grandma, who my daughter, now my youngest daughter, will never be able to meet, and it's a way to stay connected in a non-religious way. I don't identify with a certain religion, and I was struggling to find resources to talk about death in a very direct way without it being religious. So I just developed a children's book. But most of the things I connect with folks over are the poetry books, and specifically the last two recent ones. Yeah.
Sorry about that. A little break there. No, I think that I love that you talked about finding a relationship in the midst of your grief, because Too many people out there think that they're going to, that they're that isolated that they can't come into life again and be part of that. So that's very interesting. I like that. And sharing the realness of life with your children, about your children, keeping a legacy going and all of that. Yeah. So the books, I'm going to make the books available that are available on the show notes, of course. They'll always be there and on our store. So I appreciate you sharing about those and everything.
Thank you.
You've got your practice still as a therapist, and you're doing that. And what area are you in right now? Because you mentioned a few that you've covered.
Yes, I so many things. I actually, so I'm a licensed social worker, a licensed marriage and family therapist, and a certified sex therapist here in Michigan. So that is actually what I specialize in. I work with mostly women, but I work with individuals and couples, and we do a lot of work around sexual health and sexual empowerment, oftentimes after trauma. So yes, grief is involved, but typically not. Obviously, it can happen in being a therapist, but we deal a lot with a different kind of grief, a different kind of grief around, if someone is recovering from cancer, and we talk about sexual health and, grief in that way. But grief from death and dying is actually not my specialty at all. I do not do specific grief counseling, anything like that. So, my background was in trauma and sexual health, and I have a private practice, and that's what I do. And so whenever I talk to folks about the poetry, or I go speak somewhere about grief poetry, it's so, you would think, right? Like that's what I do as a therapist, but it's actually like a whole different world, also taboo, right? No one wants to talk about death and dying, and no one wants to talk about sex. So, I guess that's the two worlds that I have that do merge at times, but I'm very passionate about talking about both, and especially because people don't want to talk about either.
I did see something early on about sex and in the grief world and how that works. So I imagine that comes up for you naturally, right? And that's something that people don't want to talk about.
Does.
But what I remember was that it was said that as you move on, it's an expression of emotion and things, and that it's okay to engage when both of you and your partner are ready in the midst of the grief space, right? And so it's important because you got to start connecting back again. You try to bring your worlds back together after a grief event, and it's an important part of it. So that can be very tough for people. I know that. So it's something important that it's something to address in the midst of your grief, like everything else.
Yes.
Not let it go away.
Absolutely. And when we grieve, I know it looks, people think of it's just the movies. It's just not being able to eat. It's not being, it's a lot of crying, and to address grief in a holistic way. And that includes, your physical body, your emotional, right, your mental, all this. And it also includes your, your sexual self. So it does come up, even related to death and dying, because it affects all of you. When someone grieving anything, any kind of loss, but grieving someone who has died in something so final and so permanent, it echoes across every layer of your being. And there has to be people or spaces that address each of those layers, right? Or else they slip through the cracks, and then we're only, working on half of ourselves. And grief needs to be holistic. It has to be every layer.
Yeah, really deep. As you said, it keeps coming up in so many different ways, and that's why, because you may not have addressed certain parts a lot of the times. I think we mentioned it all. I'm not so much a writer for things. I express myself in other ways, but for everybody out there, the therapeutic aspect of writing and what you're doing, obviously, it just oozes out of you, and that is so therapeutic for you. What could you tell folks out there that may not be engaging in that? So, what would you say to folks who may not have taken that step yet into writing or whatever, and they may have those abilities or just how to start, maybe the simple way, just how do you get into it? What do you do? Because you got to break that ice eventually. And I probably know what you're going to say, but I mean, maybe those folks out there just need that little nudge.
Yeah, yeah. I think the first thing would even be just like identifying what your goal is. My goal when I originally started writing was to organize thoughts. It was to have a different tool outside of actual therapy, a tool outside of groups, group therapy, outside of reading books. Writing was something I was using again almost as a journal, which we know is effective and it is researched and very effective in reducing anxiety and depression
Yep.
and grief symptoms. So I was at first just doing that. Well, my goal then shifted to being able to share it, right? And that created social media, that created the Instagram, and now where it is. So I would say even just identifying like what your goals might be. Is it to use it as a therapeutic tool? Is it to be able to share it one day? And obviously, like I think what everyone would say is like just start jotting things down, just write it in the notes app, right? Write it on paper. You get to decide if you share it. You get to decide if it's private. And not just with writing, but also with, painting, with, sculpture, anything. You get to decide if that's your private journey or if that's something you want to share. Grievers don't owe anyone. You don't have to become something from your grief. You don't have to become some success story. You don't have to produce things from your grief, but you can. And I hope, right, everyone would find those spaces to share if they would like to and connect. It has been the most beautiful community in the world. What I've been able to do on Instagram and the folks I've connected with from all over the world. I'm so happy that I created that space, and it did take vulnerability, and I was very nervous, and I still am nervous about it. So yeah, in short, I would say like, what are your goals in creating, whether that be art or writing, and then just start. And yeah, you get to decide if you want to keep it private. You get to decide if you want to share it. Do you want to publish books? But just write things down and keep them, because you don't know if you're going to want to compile them into a collection. If you're going to want to, create prints of them, put them in a card, like you just don't know. So I would just say write and
Yeah.
save it.
You don't have to be a Sara Rian, actually, right? You just have to be yourself. And a lot of times people just write things down, and bringing that other sense into it really helps in the therapy process. You're engaging in a different dimension actually as you start writing, and you're looking at it and reading it again and all these different things. So just do it. I guess, that's the thing. Just do it, whether you keep it all to your own. A lot of times people will say, write a letter to your loved one, what you're thinking, what you're thinking, or what do you want to say to them, just like you would be talking to them, and just start writing that way. Let things flow and let it go. And you might see how it develops for you.
And that's one of my favorites. So many in my books and so many things I write, like they're just little love letters to my mom. They're just, we wrote notes to each other and cards and love letters to each other all the time while she was alive. And I didn't want that to stop just because she died. So that's so much of my poetry is just like writing to her. And I have no writing background. Like I said, I went to school to become a therapist. I do not know the history of poetry. I am very insta poet, whatever it is now, short poems, micro poetry, whatever you call it. No background. And I don't even know if I'm a writer. I don't even know what it is, but just write. Like you don't need any of that. And don't let anyone, there's going to be people gatekeeping it, and that's okay. But
I
just
love that
write.
because
Just
as an
write. So,
outsider, right? I did an interview with a woman who's a jazz singer here locally, and she sent me something afterwards. We both lost children. And so she sent me one of your writings. I got to find it on my phone here. I'll let you talk in a little bit and I'll look for it. But so she sent me that, and it had your name on there. And I always notice those things because of my networking that I do with all the grief circles. So and then a little time down the line, somebody else sent me something and it was from you. And so I was like, my impression was like, well, yeah, you were at this level that you're up there and you're this writer and you're, all these things and everything. So I love that you reveal the simplicity of it, that I'm not a writer. I'm just sharing my thoughts and my feelings. I think that could be so great for people, encouraging to them to let them just get it out there, I love that.
Yes. Yes. I like, and again, like no harm. There's no harm. I think my dad said to me at one point, I said, Dad, I'm no Rupi Kaur. I'm not trying to write a New York Times bestseller or anything. I don't even know if I should be putting these out there. And he said, it's poetry. They're books. Can you really have enough of them? And I was like, oh my gosh, you're right. What? It's not like mine's going to take up space, or it's not like it has to be some competition. It's just, how can you have too much writing? How can you have too many books in the world?
Yeah.
Right? So if you want to publish, you can't have enough of them.
Right. That's what I say about the grief work. There's a lot of, I just mentioned this at a recent podcast. There's a lot of grief podcasts out there. Everybody's like, oh, what you're doing is great. And it's like, there's a lot of them out there. I've researched it, but there can never be enough. We got to break through the stigma in society about grief. And so there's never enough. I did find the one that I was sent. Here you go. And I'm going to read it. All right, here. So this is a little bit of Sarah's work right here. To the person I was before, I forgive you for thinking you had more time, for not imagining death around every corner. I forgive you for every unspoken word and second not spent watching them breathe. I understand why you were carefree and naive, and I am sorry that I hated you for it. I forgive you for not seeing what was going to happen. I forgive you for not saving them. And even when the guilt and shame whispers to me that you do not deserve it, I forgive you. That's crazy. Crazy in a good way. I love it. There's so many things in there.
Oh.
Your thoughts of different things happening, right? I could see how that just kind of came to you as your mind's processing and you're just writing down, and it's like, and it covers so many things in grief for us. As a griever, I'm speaking as a griever, and I read those, and and maybe I process it different than even you were writing it, because in the beginning you're sitting there, the person I was before, I forgive you, and you're thinking that's some way, and then all of a sudden you get into these depths of things that stir up other things and say, wow, I didn't think of that. Maybe I need to process that. Maybe I need to do that. It's going to really be helpful in working through your grief as you go through something like that right there. Mm-hmm. So what was your process behind that one right there?
I remember writing that one. I was just talking to someone and I said, there's poems that I am smiling writing. There's poems that I'm just kind of neutral, right? Just writing about. Sometimes I'm angry, about something, and I'm writing in a spicy way about how society makes grievers, mourn in silence and grieve in silence. This one, I remember crying. Writing that. That one, I think, captures the trauma of a lot of people's grief, but that, like mine in particular, I won't speak for everybody. There are some deaths that are not traumatic, and there are so many that are. And grief alone, but when you add trauma into the mix, it brings us the guilt and the regret and the what could I have done differently. And I remember just crying for that one, because I think I was just standing in my living room with tears in my eyes and decided to just jot down what I was thinking, and it became that. But that is like the raw, any poem you see, there could be like 10 therapy sessions I've had about that one particular poem. And that's one of them. Like, that's something that I sit with every day, that, the feeling like you could have saved somebody, or the lifelong journey of just having to forgive myself and how much my body wants to resist that. So I wrote that, and it actually is just like a little mantra that I will sometimes look through and read to myself, and it still brings tears every time I read it because I'm not quite there. But I wanted to share that with people because I know I can't be the only one who's not there and the only one who thinks we might not ever actually get there where we fully forgive ourselves, but to just soften a little bit with ourselves. And just that shame and guilt and regret is just so heavy. It's just one of the most painful parts about grief, and I don't want it to take up too much space because I want that space to be filled with my mom.
Yeah.
So that's why I shared that one in particular just hope it helps someone else to see that and know that they aren't alone, and hopefully it creates more space to honor their person and shines a little light on the shame and hopefully brings it down a little bit.
I could identify with a lot of that because my son, he died of fentanyl poisoning. And so he had to work through, Jeff, why'd you do that? After being good for a long time and, just what, and so a lot of those emotions came up. I want to read another one too. Then this is the second one that I saw from you that, I don't believe in coincidences, so I'm sure it was just leading me down the path of contacting you to do the podcast. So here we go. This is called Loving the Gone. It says, thank you to every person that leans in, excited to tell me a story, not afraid of the grief, even those who did not meet me in person while alive. Thank you for asking what they were like, what it's like without them, for reminding me that they are not forgotten and they mattered. Beautiful. Beautiful. What's the story behind that one?
Yeah. So that is in my book, Loving the Gone. That was one of the last poems I wrote. I was finishing up the book, putting together in my very sloppy, unpolished way that I put my books together. I was putting all the poems together, and I was actually about to write the dedication to the, just who was it going to dedicate this book to? And I remember that poem coming to mind because I wanted to just say, like, thank you to everyone who, and it ended up becoming a poem, and I put it in the book because that would have been a very long dedication. But that's what inspired that one. Was just I try not to blame folks who don't understand grief and who respond with platitudes and unhelpful things or toxic positivity, but to really be thankful for the people who leaned right into it and who continued to love me at my worst and love my mom, and they didn't judge her for dying by suicide, and the people who didn't even know her and didn't meet me until after and still ask about her, you being one of them, asking her name, like that. I'm like, there is just nothing. I don't know if I could be thankful besides my children and the people I love. Like that, I think, is one of the things I'm like just the most grateful for. People being like
they
that.
become an object if you don't say the name, and that stinks.
Absolutely.
I want to make sure. I think I might have read a line wrong in here, and I want to make sure people know it. It says, even those who did not meet my person while alive. I might have said that wrong actually in there as I thought about it because you were talking.
I didn't catch it if you did.
Because you were talking about your mom, right?
Did.
My person. And and that's what we want to do most of all is keep them alive. They are alive. I believe they're alive still.
Yeah.
So, and you fight even what we've learned, like I said, what was your mom's name instead of what is your mom's name, because that's what we've been conditioned under. And I don't necessarily believe that anymore. So that's wonderful. Yeah, I'm going to put some disclaimers in this one with the coughing and everything. Crazy. So what question I ask a lot of people is that what do you want to say about things that you've processed and gone through and that you want people to know from the grief aspect?
Gosh. The first thing, I know that there could be so many answers to that, I'm sure. The first thing I think would be that, like, it is okay if the grief, like, if it stays, I'm going to say the word ugly. I'm going to say that. And I think grief can be beautiful. I think it comes from something beautiful, and it's there in a very beautiful way. And it means love and everything. I don't mean grief is wrong, but it doesn't have to be beautiful, and we don't have to romanticize grief, and we don't have to romanticize trauma, and we don't have to romanticize like tragic loss. I know because I'm writing about it, and people, we write poetry and we do all these things. Like, we can create beautiful words or love letters and things, but just to say to everyone, like, it's okay if it's like not beautiful, and it's okay to not have a silver lining. It's okay if you don't grow from this. I might just be talking to myself, but that's the biggest thing that just like immediately jumped out when you asked that question. What I would want to tell people is just like, don't try to force it to be something beautiful. It doesn't have to be, right? Like, your person or whatever you're grieving was beautiful enough, and it's okay if the grief is not.
You're writing as you're speaking. Did you know that?
I did not.
and isn't that the stigma that we fight? Isn't that exactly it, right? That we don't talk about grief, so it is this, and even if it is ugly and things like that, where, I don't know, I get the idea that other societies, some other cultures embrace death and grief in a different way, so it's not as stigmatized, and then it's easier when those ugly things are present, that they're normal for them instead of being something that is uncomfortable for everyone here, in our society. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's so much of our grief is trying to make it fit where everyone's comfortable. And then it's not even like the grief anymore, right? It's just this like product, or like I said before, like you have to make something beautiful. I'm like, everyone doesn't have to publish a book or create art. It's amazing when you do, and if you have the energy, and what a way to honor somebody. But just like, it's kind of ugly too, especially like trauma is ugly, and again, tragic loss is ugly. And if we try to make it pretty, it just isn't what it is anymore.
Doesn't that like I talked about, right? The platitudes, it almost comes across that way, right? Where you're like, oh yeah, well, I can keep posting these memes about nice things that, oh yes, the stairway to heaven and all these things, all these things, but it doesn't take away the reality of that ugliness. And it is okay to have that. And it's not that you can't survive in the midst of that, but I think we need to somehow embrace that better so that we can engage in that with people instead of, being the person that just like, oh, how you doing? Oh, I see that you're hurting again, so I'm going to just turn away and walk away. I mean, that's exactly what happens. That's what that person doesn't know. They don't need that.
Absolutely. Right. It can't just be, oh, you're going to talk about your loved one and you're going to be smiling with a sweet little tear in your eye. Like, no, sometimes it is like brutal, and it's like not sweet and not all just like fond memories, right? It is that guilt and shame or panic attack. And, I wrote a few weeks ago about like how you hear grief is love. And it's like, it is. And then I wrote about like everything it is too. And that's also like nightmares and panic and broken dreams and all of these things. And like, that's, I think, so important to say to people is like, this isn't a movie. This doesn't have to like be beautifully wrapped up in the end with you like walking on the beach and being so much better for it. And that's just not realistic. Right.
I'm going to share something with you. We recently went to a Jelly Roll concert, and so my son Jeff loved Jelly Roll, and I still picture him as we played darts in the garage. We've got a nice made up garage, and him singing Jelly Roll as he's playing it and bouncing around, and we went to the concert, and I knew it would be emotional to some degree, but I absolutely lost it during one of his songs, and just lost it. Harder than I've cried in a long, long time. And so these other folks, and Judy was with me, and she was the same pretty much. And so I just I looked at the folks next to me, and I just apologized. And I said, I'm sorry. I said, I'm okay, and this is okay for this to be happening. And I just told them a little bit about the story. I said I lost my son last year, and this is a favorite performer of his, and it's very emotional. And they were just like, "It's all right." And I thought that was great. What a response! What a response! It totally made me feel comfortable immediately. And they're like, "No, that's all right." And I think I've engaged with some younger people, the younger generation, a little bit, and they seem to have more of a sense of that. Maybe it's more with the awareness of everything that we talk about and for people and everything, but they seem to just have a more absolute, like, "Oh no, I get it." Where people of my generation, a lot of them are those ones who are like, oh, well, I don't know. You can instantly see them get uncomfortable. It's like, and that's right away you feel that's a whole nother aspect of the tragedy that hits you, where it's like, oh God, now I got to deal with this, and, you know,
Yeah,
right.
zip it up, and then almost like you're hiding, right? Like Jeff, Susan, right? It's like now I'm zipping them
Yeah.
all up, right? Because you're
Yeah.
uncomfortable.
No, I just don't care. I talk about Jeff all the time. We watched our team here, the Buffalo Bills, where he's a huge football fan, watched all the games with us. And last night, I'm like, yeah, Jeff, he hated this quarterback or liked that one, we're just talking about him. And I even sense, I don't think it's really true because this is people that love me around me. But I'm just going to keep saying it. I don't care. It's going to happen. So this is the way my life's going now. So, there you go.
Yeah.
But they're the same.
There's
They
no
say the
reason
same.
not
So I
to.
love it.
Yeah.
It's nice that, we're keeping his legacy is going to stay like your mom's, that you're doing, keep her legacy alive. And I've seen some great examples of that happening in people's lives. It's great to keep them, for your children to know who they were and everything and know who they are. And so, that's tremendous to be able to do that for sure.
Thank you. Yeah. And I think like podcasts like these and, having pages on Instagram and Facebook dedicated, I think that also is why it's changing, right? It's like, oh my gosh, it's actually
Yeah.
working, right? We're talking about grief more. We're talking about death and dying. We're talking about, suicide, whatever it might be. And I think we see it, right? We see it in younger generations. Like it's paying off. Like they're getting comfortable talking about it. They're not just shutting it down. They're not just walking away from it. So to me, I think this podcast and, books about it and things just being talked about more regularly and being so accessible. I mean, it kind of, it just feels very motivating to keep it going because like we could be changing the world and how society is with grief. And I think we had it at one point. I think we must have had it at one point, and then obviously for many factors and reasons it changed. And hopefully we can get back to a more like grief embracing place.
That's nice. I appreciate that myself because the motivation to keep going all the time with it and everything. And as your life goes on during a week, you're like more motivated about it at other times. And sometimes like, oh, I got to get this in or whatever. That helps a lot. And I appreciate that very much because, you need the kick to keep going for sure, so, and you too, for that matter,
Keep we're humans, right? And we're also grieving. So we can't, I'm like, oh yeah, I forget. And it's like, even I love the title of this podcast, right? Like heroes. And I'm like, oh yeah, we're also human, right? And I love that it's just that we're humans doing amazing grief work. And like, just how cool is that to be able to do that and take breaks when we need it and grieve and also do just like amazing
I don't know
work.
if you heard the intro that I do on this, but I didn't like the hero. The title came to me, and I believe that things are given to me. So I struggled with the hero thing initially because I don't think any of us want to be put into that light. But then when I discovered a little bit about the definition of it, it was like it really fit. We've made heroes in society this other thing that many of them, of course, are, but it's not all that there is. So you can be a hero in your normal life, so for sure. Sarah, what an enjoyable conversation. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I think that folks are
Thank
going to
you.
really appreciate hearing, the side of you that they don't know, that they don't see from the poems and everything else. And they certainly learn a lot about you there. But the way that you do it from behind it and everything, I think even takes it to another level for them. And I think that's very precious. So I appreciate it, you and your work. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me be here and just talk, outside of my Instagram page or my Facebook page. It's to have these amazing conversations around grief and loss and everything, love. It just means the world
Well,
to me.
thanks.
So thank you.
You're very busy with your work, I imagine, but I mean, are you accessible to people on your pages and things?
Absolutely. I have like contact pages set up on my website. You can contact, I answer everything myself in terms of like direct messages on Instagram. There's also like a contact form on there if you want to like do it through email. So yes, I don't have, it's just me running everything. It's not too big to where I can't handle all of that. So yeah, anytime you message or send something through a contact form, like I respond, even if it's just sometimes people want to say thank you or ask about a book or, hey, can you send a book to so-and-so and write something in it? I try to do all of that. And I love it. So if anyone ever wants to reach out, I'm available.
That is great work because people really want to be able to touch that when it means something for them. And so for you to make yourself available like that is very precious. Thank you for doing that. Yeah. And it's encouraging to get those messages, of course. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm,
Yeah.
mm-hmm. I love it. It's so nice.
All right, Sarah. Well, maybe we'll get to talk soon again for other things. You got any other books planned or anything like that, or did they just come about
They come about. Yep, they come about. I described it during something about every time I finish one, I think that's it with poems and with books. But eventually, I write so much it feels like a fruit that's just overgrowing and kind of like hanging off of a tree, and I gotta grab it and pick it. So we're almost to that point to where I have a feeling there's gonna be something probably out early next year if I can even like hold it that long. Because once I go, it takes me like a month to put a book together, maybe. So I just kind of collect everything. So yes, I would say definitely have eyes open right early next year, 2025.
Excellent.
For sure.
So everybody's going to want to get on her website, get on Sarah's website or social media and connect with her on there so you can be made aware of that. And when I catch them too coming by, I always kind of put things back out there for you so that you can promote that and everything too. So let me know for sure too.
Thank you.
So I hope we stay connected. So
I will.
All right, Sarah, thanks again. And we will see you soon. All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Heroes in Grief podcast. If you'd like access to any of the links that we discussed in today's show, you can find them in the show notes. There's also a link there to support the podcast if you care to. And there is an email link for me there. I'd love to hear from you and your ideas about the show or what you thought about the show. You really can help out this podcast to get to more people if you subscribe, rate, or review it in whichever way your platform provides. Each week, Heroes in Grief is released on Sunday, so look for new episodes there. Thank you again for listening to Heroes in Grief.